"Sir, you need to step back. This hearing isn't for people like you." The words sliced through the courtroom before Rowan could finish pointing at the airflow chart on the projector. Security shifted, already moving toward him, while a row of attorneys smirked like they'd been waiting for this exact moment. And the CEO, the man whose tower Rowan had tried to warn them about, didn't even bother to look up. He just waved a dismissive hand and said, "Get the maintenance guy out." By the way, where are you watching from? Tell me in the comments below. And stay with me, because you're about to see why throwing him out was the worst mistake they could have made. Rowan didn't fight, didn't raise his voice, didn't even correct them. He simply lowered his hand, breathed once, and let their humiliation land where it needed to. He'd been talked over before, pushed aside before. This wasn't new. But today, something in the air felt different. He kept his gaze, steady, calm, almost unshakable, even as security reached for his elbow. If anything, the silence around him made the truth louder. He wasn't there to cause trouble. He was there because the ventilation model on that screen wasn't just flawed, it was dangerous, and someone had to say it before approval went through. But the moment stretched deeper than engineering numbers. Beneath the fluorescent lights and polished courtroom wood, Rowan carried the weight of a much quieter crisis. Lena, his little girl with the soft lungs and brave face. The one who couldn't spend more than an hour in a poorly ventilated building without coughing. The one he promised, every day, to protect at any cost. She always asked what he did at the courthouse. He told her he fixed things. That was true. But what she didn't know, what almost no one here knew, was that he used to inspect structures that held thousands of lives. He used to prevent disasters before they ever reached a headline. He used to be the person these executives were pretending to be. Now he stood in a room where people were paid to listen to truth, yet dismissed him before he finished a single sentence. Because of a uniform. Because of a badge that said maintenance instead of engineer. Because people like Vantrell didn't look down, they only looked ahead and assumed nothing behind them mattered. As security nudged him again, Rowan's eyes drifted back to the screen. The airflow curve was wrong, completely wrong. Anyone with real field experience would have seen the buildup risk immediately. In the tower they were approving, families like his could end up breathing recycled toxins without ever knowing why. And if occupancy hit peak load on a humid day, he didn't want to finish the calculation. This wasn't about pride. It wasn't about proving he once held a prestigious title. It was about responsibility, something he hadn't let go of even after stepping back from federal work. He still filed that safety objection weeks ago, anonymously, quietly, hoping they'd catch the error and fix it. But they hadn't caught it. Or worse, they'd buried it. And now, the only person in the room who understood the real threat was being walked out like a disruption. Rowan didn't resist. He didn't need to. He knew something none of them knew yet. The truth always found a way to the surface. Sometimes slowly, sometimes violently, but always eventually. And today, that surface was about to crack wide open. As he stepped backward toward the aisle, a murmur rippled near the judge's empty bench. Papers rustled. A clerk leaned toward the mic, brows pinched like they'd just seen a ghost in the docket. Security paused, sensing the shift, but not understanding it. Rowan felt it before hearing it, the faint tremor of attention turning his way. Not mockery now, not dismissal, something else. Recognition, not of his face, of his filing, of the certification number tied to it. But that moment hadn't arrived fully yet. Right now, He was still the man being pushed out of a room where decisions about public safety were made by people who'd never climbed a real scaffold, never breathed fumes in a collapsing corridor, never held responsibility that could crush you if you got one calculation wrong. He straightened his shoulders, silently preparing for whatever was coming next. Whatever humiliation they threw his way would not shake who he was. Titles could be lost, jobs could be changed, but expertise, real expertise, didn't disappear, and neither did duty. So he waited, calm, centered, quiet. The judge was seconds from entering, and when she did, everything they thought they knew about the maintenance guy would shatter. The judge's entrance cut through the courtroom like a shift in weather, subtle at first, then impossible to ignore. Conversations thinned. Security released their hold just enough for Rowan to stop moving. Judge Vailwood stepped up to the bench with the kind of quiet authority that made everyone straighten their posture without thinking. She didn't look at him yet. She didn't have to. The room was already tilting toward a different gravity. Her clerk leaned close, whispering urgently while holding a thin printout, his filing. Rowan recognized the layout instantly. The formatting, the certification block, the airflow annotations he'd written late at night after Lena fell asleep. All of it suddenly in the hands of the one person whose judgment mattered more than every executive in this room combined. "Your Honor," the clerk murmured louder now, "there's an unresolved safety submission connected to Petitioner's Tower. It's flagged as priority." Elias Vantrill's head snapped up at that, irritation flashing across his face. He didn't like surprises, especially not ones that involved oversight. Judge Vailwood lifted the printout, scanning it with a sharpness that left no room for interpretation. Her eyes locked onto a detail, the certification number at the bottom. A number Rowan hadn't seen written aloud in months. The judge looked up, directly at security, then at him. "Hold on," she said coolly. "No one removes him." The shift was instant. Security halted mid-step. The attorneys in the front row exchanged glances. Ventrell's expression tightened, a fracture spreading through his confidence. Rowan stayed still, refusing to fill the air with explanations. Silence had always served him better than panic, and right now, silence was the clearest statement he could make. "Mr. Halberg," Judge Vailwood said, finally addressing him directly, "approach." He didn't move right away. It wasn't fear. It was calculation. He needed to understand exactly what she saw in that document. Then he stepped forward, hands loose at his sides, expression steady. Ventrell's attorney cut in sharply. "Your Honor, with respect, this individual is not a BUE party to the hearing. He's a maintenance worker who—" The judge raised one hand. A quiet gesture, but absolute. "I didn't ask for commentary." Her attention returned to Rowan. "Is this your certification?" There it was, the moment he'd been bracing for, the certification number tied to his past, one he hadn't expected to matter again. "Yes, Your Honor," he said. "It is." A ripple moved through the benches, realization, recognition, or at least the beginning of it, but she wasn't finished. "And the safety analysis filed under this number," her gaze sharpened. "Did you author it?" Rowan nodded once. "I did." The attorney shifted again, suddenly unsure if they should treat him like a janitor or a federal-level structural engineer. The tension tasted metallic, charged. Vantrell leaned forward, forcing composure. "Your Honor, this is highly irregular. Anyone can submit a complaint during public review. That doesn't make it credible." Rowan finally turned his head toward him. Calm, not confrontational, just present in a way Vantrell clearly hadn't expected. Judge Vailwood tapped the report lightly with a fingernail. It becomes credible when the person who submitted it holds an active federal engineering license, specializing in structural airflow integrity. She looked at Rowan again. And when they are standing in my courtroom. The victory strategy nudged forward. Public exposure had begun. Not fully, not dramatically yet, but the foundation was cracking under Vantrell's feet. Rowan didn't bask in the moment. He wasn't here to win anything. He was here because people could get hurt if the truth stayed buried. That mattered more than pride. Your Honor, Rowan said evenly, the airflow numbers being presented today don't match the corrected model. The tower isn't safe at peak occupancy. Gasps scattered through the room. Not loud, just enough. Vantrell immediately countered. He's overstepping. He's not qualified to interpret our proprietary systems. But Judge Vailwood didn't look convinced. Mr. Halberg, she said, do you have experience analyzing commercial high-rise ventilation models? Yes, Rowan replied, for 12 years. A subtle, almost imperceptible shift in the judge's shoulders told Rowan she understood the weight of that. This was no amateur, no disgruntled citizen filing random objections. This was someone who had once been responsible for keeping entire cities safe. Vantrell tried again, irritation fraying the edges of his voice. Your Honor, we can provide documentation proving our model meets code. Then you won't mind if Mr. Halberg reviews the projections you've submitted today, the judge said. If they're compliant, his objection will resolve quickly. The room froze. This was the pivot point. The moment when humiliation no longer held power, when quiet competence stepped into the light, whether anyone invited it or not. Rowan exhaled slowly. Not relief, preparation. If she allowed him to speak, he would tell the truth, and that truth would reshape everything in this room. But before he moved toward the projection screen, his phone buzzed silently in his pocket. A picture from Lena's school, showing her smiling, unaware of the storm unfolding here. That image grounded him, reminded him why he was standing here in the first place. Not for pride, not for recognition, for safety, for families, for her. The judge gestured toward the screen. Mr. Halberg, she said, please show us where the discrepancy begins. Rowan stepped forward. The entire courtroom held its breath. Rowan stood before the massive courtroom screen, the ventilation model glowing in cool blue lines across the graph. Every eye fixed on him. Security, attorneys, clerks, the judge, and Vantrell himself, whose jaw had tightened as if he could hold the room together through sheer will. But the moment belonged to Rowan now, whether anyone liked it or not. He lifted the laser pointer slowly, grounding himself with one breath. This, he said, tapping the rising curve on the chart, is where the discrepancy starts. The room leaned in, literally. Even those pretending not to care shifted just enough to see. Judge Vailwood's voice cut gently through the silence. Walk us through it. Rowan nodded once, calm, controlled. This wasn't his first time explaining a failing model, just the first time he'd done it wearing a maintenance uniform instead of a federal badge. The curve here should flatten under load compensation, he said, drawing a small arc in the air. But instead, it continues rising. That means the tower's upper floors will retain contaminants rather than expel them under heavy occupancy. One attorney frowned. That's impossible. Our engineers... Your engineers, Rowan replied softly. Missed a humidity variable correction. It compounds the error. A few gasps fluttered around the courtroom. Not dramatic, just the sound of people realizing everything they assumed was stable. Wasn't. Rowan didn't turn to face Vantrell. He kept his attention on the data. This wasn't personal. It was physics. It was airflow. It was responsibility, but Vantrell couldn't let it go. This is highly speculative, he snapped. We've run every regulatory model. Our team is one of the best. And yet the model on your screen, Rowan said, doesn't meet code under peak occupancy. Silence. Then the judge leaned forward. Mr. Hallberg, she asked, is this the same issue referenced in your filed safety objection? Yes, Rowan answered. The numbers here match the red flag entries in my report. A pulse of attention traveled through the courtroom. What he was doing now wasn't just pointing out a flaw. He was validating the legitimacy of his filing. And with every word, the victory, strategy tightened around the truth. Public exposure, unfolding live. Judge Vailwood motioned for the clerk. Pull the filed report. While they searched the docket, Rowan lowered the pointer. His heartbeat was steady now, strangely steady, like the years of crisis-driven training had never left him. He didn't need vindication. He needed them to listen before approval stamped disaster into the city skyline. Behind him, murmurs thickened, whispers about credentials, about the certification number. Someone mentioned they'd seen his name years ago on a federal advisory paper. A small thing, but enough to begin reshaping the narrative. And still, Rowan didn't turn around. He kept breathing, kept focusing, kept holding the responsibility in place. When the clerk returned with the printed report, the judge reviewed it briefly, then placed it beside the display. This objection, she said, tapping the corner of the report, identifies the same discrepancy Mr. Hallberg just explained. Vantrell tried to interject, teeth clenched. Your Honor, this is a stunt. He's exaggerating to undermine. Rowan finally looked at him. Not confrontational, not angry, just unmovable. If I was exaggerating, Rowan said quietly, I wouldn't have submitted a signed federal-level certification with a traceable license, nor would I be risking legal accountability for falsifying a safety concern. The attorneys stiffened. That phrasing mattered. A lot. Judge Vailwood folded her hands. Mr. Vantrell, is your team prepared to demonstrate compliance under humidity variable peak load? A beat of hesitation, then another. And in that tiny pause, smaller than a breath, the courtroom understood the truth. They couldn't. They never accounted for it. Rowan turned back to the model. Your Honor, if the approval goes through today and occupancy hits max during seasonal humidity spikes, upper-level residents will experience airflow reversal. Contaminants could linger for hours. In worst-case conditions, we've heard enough of this doomsday rhetoric, Vantrell snapped, his voice cracking under pressure. But it was too late. The room already knew Rowan wasn't rhetorical. He was factual, measured, and absolutely right. Judge Vailwood's attention shifted to her oversight liaison seated behind the counsel tables. Verify the airflow reversal projection, now. The liaison stood immediately, already dialing a number. The courtroom felt like a lung holding air, waiting to exhale. Meanwhile, Rowan's thoughts flickered briefly to Lena, her inhaler, the way her breath tightened on humid days, the nights he'd kept her propped up so she could sleep easier. She wasn't fragile. She was strong. But her lungs deserved better than a world built on ignored warnings. He swallowed that thought and straightened. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about every family who trusts the tower's safety without ever knowing what could have been prevented. Security hovered nearby, no longer sure whether to guard him or guard everyone else from the truth he had just detonated across the room. The liaison returned after several tense minutes. "Your Honor," he said, voice stiff, "the airflow numbers presented today do not match the sealed compliance model. Reversal risk is confirmed." A hush, deep, heavy. Vantrell's face drained of color. Judge Valewood closed the folder with finality. "Then this hearing cannot move forward. Until further review, tower approval is suspended." The room erupted. Chatter, shock, disbelief. But Rowan stood still, absorbing none of the chaos. He just breathed, calm in the middle of the storm, knowing he had done exactly what he came here to do: protect people, protect families, protect the truth. Chaos filled the courtroom the moment Judge Valewood suspended the tower approval. Reporters surged to their feet. Attorneys scrambled for position. Security shifted, uneasily, as if waiting for a command that no longer applied. But Rowan didn't move. He stayed centered, absorbing the storm as though he'd been standing in the eye of it long before today. Judge Valewood raised a hand. "Order. Sit down, all of you." It took several seconds, but the room slowly settled. Not fully, just enough for her voice to reclaim authority. She turned toward Rowan. "Mr. Halberg, remain available. I may need your testimony formally recorded." He nodded. "Of course, Your Honor." That simple acknowledgement deepened the rupture in the room. The maintenance badge on his shirt suddenly meant far less than the invisible weight of experience behind his words. People who had barely noticed him an hour ago were now staring like they'd missed something monumental. And they had. Vantrell's frustration finally cracked through polished corporate control. He leaned in toward his lead attorney, whispering sharply before stepping out from behind his table. "Your Honor," he said, attempting a calm tone, "suspending this approval based on one unvetted objection sets a dangerous precedent." Rowan didn't react. Vantrell wasn't talking to him, just around him, the way people in power often did when they couldn't accept that someone they underestimated had shifted the entire foundation under their feet. Judge Valewood arched an eyebrow. "Dangerous is approving a structure with confirmed safety inconsistencies. This decision isn't negotiable." "But he isn't even part of this proceeding," Vantrell pressed. "He's not an expert witness. He's not contracted. He's a licensed federal structural engineer," the judge cut in, "with 12 years of relevant experience and a filed objection that your team failed to address." A faint ripple of satisfaction moved through the benches. Not from Rowan, but from people who had spent their lives watching executives dodge accountability. Seeing someone finally held in check felt unusual. Still, Rowan kept his eyes forward. No gloating, no triumph, just a quiet readiness for whatever came next. The oversight liaison approached the bench. "Your Honor, we'll need updated modeling from both parties before rescheduling, and we should review the discrepancies in the submitted documents." "Agreed," she said. "Prepare directives. Today's hearing is adjourned." The gavel fell. A sound like a verdict, not just for the tower, but for the arrogance that had tried to shove Rowan out minutes earlier. As the courtroom emptied in a chaotic swirl of voices and camera shutters, Rowan waited by the aisle, letting the crowd pass. He didn't want to walk in the middle of that. He preferred quiet exits. But quiet wasn't coming. Someone approached, soft footsteps. a hesitant pause. It was the clerk who had first recognized the filing. "Mr. Halberg, I just wanted to say your objection was the most detailed submission we've seen all quarter. Sorry it got buried." Rowan offered a small, grateful nod. "I appreciate that. It shouldn't have taken this long for someone to listen." He didn't disagree. He just gave a gentle half-smile and continued toward the hallway. Behind him, the sound of raised voices caught his attention. Vantrell and his attorney arguing in low, urgent tones. A security guard passed by, muttering under his breath. "Didn't see that coming." No one had. As Rowan stepped into the main corridor, sunlight cut across the marble floors, warming the cold tension lingering in his chest. It felt grounding, familiar, like the dozens of times he'd left inspection sites after delivering news no developer wanted to hear. Except this time, it wasn't his job. It was his responsibility. He checked his phone. A new message from Lena's school, a picture of her lunchtime drawing, a stick figure dad holding a toolbox next to a tall building with a big smiley face. He huffed a quiet laugh. Somehow she always knew how to keep him steady. Just as he started toward the exit, footsteps echoed behind him. "Mr. Halberg," Judge Valewood. He turned, carefully respectful. "Yes, Your Honor." She approached with the measured calm of someone accustomed to carrying truth like a weight. "You handled yourself professionally today. Your contribution was essential." "Thank you," he said. "I wasn't trying to disrupt anything." "I know," she paused. "That's why it mattered." For a moment, there was silence. Not uncomfortable, just quietly significant. "I do have a question," she continued. "Why step away from engineering? Your record suggests a strong career." Rowan's throat tightened just slightly. He swallowed. "My daughter needed me home. Federal work doesn't allow much room for that." The judge nodded slowly. "A noble choice. But your expertise is still powerful, even from where you stand now." He let out a soft breath. "Sometimes people see the uniform and assume the rest doesn't exist." "Then today served another purpose," she said gently. "A reminder that competence doesn't disappear just because someone stops announcing it." She turned back toward the courtroom. "You may be called to testify formally. Rest for now." "Yes, Your Honor." She left, leaving Rowan alone in the hallway. Yet not truly alone this time. Something had shifted around him, an invisible current. A recognition that, despite everything he'd stepped away from, the world still had a way of pulling him back to where he was needed. As he walked toward the exit, the doors ahead opened, letting in a rush of city air. Fresh, bright. He stepped through them with the quiet certainty of a man who hadn't sought power, but had just reclaimed his voice anyway. Rowan stepped out into the crisp afternoon air, letting the courthouse doors close behind him. The noise inside, the reporters, the arguments, the clatter of urgency, muffled into a distant hum. Out here, everything felt calmer, clearer. He took a slow breath, rolling his shoulders back as if shedding the tension of the last hour. He didn't feel triumphant, just steady, and tired in a way that came from carrying too much responsibility for too long. He checked his phone again, another picture from Lena, a little heart drawn under the toolbox now. He smiled despite himself, pocketing the phone before the swirl of courthouse chaos spilled outward. It didn't take long. The doors burst open behind him, releasing a flood of journalists. They weren't looking for him, not yet. They were hunting Vantrell, who had slipped out the side entrance minutes earlier. Microphones bobbed like fishing rods thrown blindly into a storm. Rowan stepped farther aside, leaning lightly against the stone railing. The last thing he wanted was attention. He just needed a moment to think, to understand what came next, what responsibilities he'd just reawakened. Then he heard hurried footsteps behind him. "Mr. Halberg, wait, please!" He turned, surprised to see someone he hadn't noticed in the courtroom, a woman holding a thick binder against her chest, cheeks flushed from running. Her courthouse badge showed she worked in compliance review. "I'm sorry," she said, catching her breath. "I didn't mean to startle you." "It's all right," Rowan replied gently. "What can I help you with?" She hesitated, glancing toward the journalist before lowering her voice. "I recognized your report days ago. I wanted to flag it, but things move differently when a developer like Van Trell is involved." He didn't show judgment. She looked young, knew enough to know the rules, but old enough to know how easily powerful companies bent them. "I understand," he said. She shook her head. "No, you don't. Your filing scared people. The kind of inconsistencies you pointed out, they usually get caught by internal reviews, not external objections. But someone overrode that process." Rowan frowned. "Overrode?" "Yes." She hugged the binder tighter. "Your report wasn't just overlooked, it was buried." A cold flicker tightened in Rowan's chest. He'd suspected it, but hearing confirmation changed the ground beneath him. "Why are you telling me this now?" he asked. She swallowed. "Because when you stepped up today, you proved you cared more about safety than politics. And because—" She looked down, voice dropping. "I'm afraid of what happens if this gets swept under the rug again." Before Rowan could reply, a shadow stretched across the ground beside them. It was a tall man in a dark suit, Van Trell's senior consultant. His expression carried that polished corporate smile that never quite reached the eyes. "Mr. Halberg," he said smoothly. "A word?" The young clerk stiffened instantly. Rowan's jaw tightened, though he kept his posture neutral. "What do you need?" Rowan asked, voice even. The consultant stepped closer, still smiling. "There's no need for hostility. I just wanted to extend an invitation on behalf of Mr. Van Trell." Rowan raised an eyebrow. "An invitation?" "Yes," the man said. "We'd like to discuss your concerns privately, off the record. I'm sure we can find an arrangement that satisfies everyone." There it was, the first attempt to silence him, wrapped in polite corporate language. "An arrangement?" Rowan echoed. "Compensation for your time," the consultant clarified. "A consulting fee, perhaps, something that reflects your expertise. All we ask is that you refrain from further public statements until we resolve this internally." The clerk looked horrified, but said nothing. Rowan let the words settle. He could feel the strategy behind them. Pressure disguised as courtesy. Control disguised as collaboration. A tactic he'd seen too many times in his old life. He straightened slightly. "I'm not interested." The consultant blinked. "Excuse me?" "The issue isn't my compensation," Rowan said. "It's public safety." The smile on the consultant's face thinned. "Mr. Halberg, you're being emotional. We're offering you a way to avoid unnecessary conflict." Rowan's tone stayed level. "Conflict isn't the problem. Integrity is." The consultant's jaw flexed. "I'll tell Mr. Van Trell you declined, but understand, your involvement will complicate things for you." Rowan didn't flinch. "Then they'll be complicated." The man turned, disappearing back toward the side entrance with clipped, irritated steps. The clerk exhaled shakily. That was bold. No, Rowan said. It was necessary. She studied him with a kind of quiet respect. I'll keep digging on my side. If they tampered with the docket, we'll find it. He nodded, grateful. Be careful. She gave a tight nod and hurried back inside. Rowan finally stepped away from the courthouse steps and started toward the parking lot. The wind had changed. Cooler now, carrying the low rumble of traffic and the sharp edge of something unfolding beyond his control. The victory strategy had shifted into its next phase. Public exposure wasn't just about numbers anymore. It was about uncovering who had tried to hide them and why. Rowan reached his truck in the far corner of the courthouse lot, the weight of the consultant's threat still settling over him. He unlocked the door, slid inside, and let his hands rest on the steering wheel for a moment. Not trembling, steady. Too steady, actually. It was the kind of stillness that came before something big, the kind his old colleagues used to recognize right before a structural failure proved itself real. But before he could start the engine, his phone buzzed again, a text from an unknown number. They're rewriting the internal notes. Be careful who you trust. No name, no signature. But he knew exactly who had sent it. The young clerk from moments earlier. And now she was sending warnings. He exhaled slowly. This was bigger than buried paperwork. Someone had actively modified the official review process. That wasn't just oversight, that was intentional. He started the car and pulled out of the lot, but halfway down the block, he noticed a black sedan 2 lengths behind him. Nondescript, windows tinted, moving when he moved, slowing when he slowed. He tested it, 3 turns through side streets. It followed, not aggressively, not close enough to intimidate, just present, watchful. Rowan's jaw tightened. He'd seen this tactic before, soft surveillance meant to apply pressure, not provoke confrontation. The kind companies used when they wanted a problem to disappear quietly. He didn't panic. He just adjusted. Instead of heading home, he turned toward the industrial west side of the city, toward the older districts where long warehouses blocked sightlines and traffic stayed thin in mid-afternoon. When the sedan followed again, he turned down a narrow access road behind an abandoned factory, a place people rarely chose unless they knew it well. Then he stopped the truck, killed the engine, and waited. The sedan hesitated at the mouth of the lane. And then, a shift. The car reversed, pulling away as if deciding he was no longer worth following. That told him everything. They weren't trying to confront him. They were measuring him, testing how he reacted under pressure. He rested both hands on the wheel, inhaling deeply. "All right," he murmured. "You want to watch? Watch." He drove home carefully, weaving through crowded routes where tailing him would be obvious. This time, the sedan didn't return. But as soon as he stepped into his apartment, the air felt wrong, not dangerous, just heavy. He shut the door behind him and found Lena in the living room, coloring on the floor next to the couch. "Hi, Dad," she chirped without looking up. He knelt beside her, letting the sight of her small, determined hands steady him. "Hey, kiddo, good day," she nodded enthusiastically. "We learned how to shade trees." She held up a scribbled green swirl that vaguely resembled one. He smiled. "Looks perfect." She didn't notice his distraction, his quiet checking of the locks, his glance toward the windows. She didn't need to. She was safe. That was all that mattered. But safety wasn't guaranteed, not anymore. As he warmed water for tea, his phone buzzed again. This time it was a call. from a number he didn't recognize. He answered. "Hello?" A voice spoke softly, almost a whisper. "Mr. Halberg, it's me, the clerk." "I didn't want to text more," she continued quickly. "I'm calling from a private line. I found something." Rowan moved to the kitchen window, lowering his voice. "What did you find?" "Your report didn't just get buried," she said. "It was reassigned. Someone moved it into a non-actionable queue and flagged it as non-critical citizen input. That doesn't happen by accident." He closed his eyes briefly. "Who signed the change?" "That's the problem," she whispered. "There's no signature, just an ID string assigned to external counsel." Vantrell's counsel. "Of course," she continued, voice trembling. "There's more. The original file timestamp doesn't match the docket entry. Someone edited it." He leaned against the counter. "You're sure?" "Yes. And if the oversight board discovers this, the entire case could escalate into a federal investigation." He didn't want to drag her into something dangerous, but the truth needed air. "Thank you for telling me." "I'm scared," she admitted. "If they know I accessed those files—" "They won't," Rowan said firmly. "You were verifying a flagged docket. That's your job." A shaky exhale came through the line. "Still, be careful. They're not handling this like a standard review." He ended the call gently, letting her retreat back into whatever small safety she had. Then he stood in silence for a long moment, staring at the tea kettle humming on the stove. The problem wasn't just the airflow model anymore. It was the cover-up, deliberate, coordinated, possibly criminal, and he had stepped right into the center of it. But he wasn't alone. Another buzz, a message, this time from an old contact he hadn't spoken to since leaving federal service. "Heard your name in a courtroom feed. Call me. You'll want advice." Rowan stared at the message, something shifting inside him, something he hadn't let rise since his wife died. Resolve. Not the defensive kind, the active kind. The kind that built bridges, stopped failures, protected lives. The kind that had carried him through collapses and catastrophes long before he became a single father with too much grief and too little time. He turned off the kettle and grabbed his jacket. Lena looked up. "Where are you going, Dad?" He knelt beside her, smoothing her hair. "Just downstairs to make a quick call. I'll be right back." "Okay," she returned to her coloring. Rowan stepped outside to the stairwell, phone in hand, pulse steady. He dialed the number. "Halberg," the voice answered immediately. "What did you step into?" Rowan inhaled, something that shouldn't have been ignored. "Well," the voice replied, "now that you've exposed them, they're going to push back hard. You ready for that?" Rowan looked out over the parking lot, at the way daylight stretched across the asphalt like a promise. "I'm not backing down," he said. "And you shouldn't," the voice replied. "Because you're right, and because families could get hurt if you stop now." Families, plural, not just his. Rowan nodded, more to himself than the voice. The victory strategy had reached its turning point. The truth was no longer buried. And the people who tried to bury it, they had just made their first mistake. Rowan ended the call and stood in the dim stairwell for a moment, letting the silence press against him like a question he hadn't answered yet. His old contact's warning echoed through his mind. They're going to push back hard. He knew that world, knew how people like Vantrell operated when threatened. They didn't argue. They didn't negotiate. They found pressure points and applied force. Rowan wasn't afraid of force. He'd faced storms far worse than corporate retaliation, but he had Lena now, and everything he did had to protect her first. He slipped his phone into his pocket, took one long breath, and walked back upstairs. Lena was still coloring. She looked up briefly, smiled, and returned to her page with the certainty of a child who believed the world was safe as long as her father was nearby. That anchored him, settled him. He couldn't let her world crack because he'd stepped back into a field he thought he'd left behind. His phone buzzed again. This time, an email from Judge Valewood's clerk. Subject: urgent, meeting requested time. Tomorrow, 9 a.m. Location: Court Annex Room 4. B, a formal follow-up. Expected, necessary, but also dangerous. Anything spoken at a formal meeting went into the case file, and anything in the case file threatened the people who had buried his report in the first place. He closed the email, then he froze. A soft knock sounded at his apartment door. Not loud, not hurried, just a deliberate, measured tap. Lena didn't even look up. Rowan walked toward the door slowly, instincts sharpened. He checked the peephole. Not who he expected. It was the young clerk, the one who had risked her job to warn him. She looked nervous, glancing over her shoulder as if she'd run here instead of taking the bus. Rowan opened the door halfway. "You shouldn't be here." Her relief was immediate. I know, but something happened after you left." He stepped aside and let her in, locking the door quietly behind her. She stood just inside the living room, wringing her hands around the strap of her bag. "Tell me," he said softly. "They're trying to alter the record again," she whispered. "The consultant you spoke to, he met with someone on the internal review team. They're preparing a counter-narrative. They want to discredit your objection before the oversight board sees it." Rowan's jaw tightened. "How?" "By claiming you misinterpreted the model, that your license is inactive, and that you submitted the report out of personal grievance." Rowan stared at her, stunned, not by the lies, but by the boldness of them. "That's reckless," he said. "My license is active. My data is correct." "I know," she said quickly, "but this is about perception, not truth. They want enough doubt to stall everything." That was the first real crack in the facade. The first sign that Vantrell's team was afraid. Fear made people sloppy. "Why tell me this in person?" Rowan asked. She hesitated. Then she removed a folded sheet of paper from her bag and handed it to him. "Because this was about to disappear." He unfolded it slowly. It was an internal docket note, unedited. The original version of the file referencing his report, not the altered one. Original submission flagged for priority review. Significant airflow anomaly detected. Requires senior verification. His report hadn't been dismissed. It had been acknowledged, which meant someone at Vantrell's level had intervened before it reached the board. Rowan looked up. "You could lose your job for giving me this." She swallowed. "I'd rather lose my job than help approve a tower that could hurt people." He held her gaze for a long moment. Quiet admiration softened his features. She wasn't a conflicted ally anymore. She was committed. Brave in a way most people never were in the face of powerful employers. "What's your name?" he asked gently. "Maris," she said. "Thank you, Maris." She nodded quickly, but the fear in her eyes didn't fade. "Tomorrow's meeting. You need to be careful. They won't confront you directly. They'll try to corner you in the record, twist your wording, push you to overstate your concerns so they can claim you're biased." Rowan considered that. She was right. He'd seen expert witnesses fall into that trap before. "I'll be ready," he said. Then her gaze drifted to Lena, still coloring on the carpet. A shadow crossed Maris's face. "Does she know what's happening?" "No," Rowan replied. "And she won't." Maris offered a thin, sad smile. "I hope so, because this is going to get worse before it gets better." She turned to leave. Rowan walked her to the door. "Take care," he said quietly. "You too," she whispered, and hurried down the hall. Rowan closed the door and leaned against it, letting the weight of the moment settle fully. The discovery phase was no longer just about technical truth. Now it was about uncovering layers of deception, each deeper, riskier, and more calculated than the last. He had allies, he had evidence, he had experience, but Vantrell had influence, money, and a motive to bury the truth permanently. Rowan looked toward Lena again. She smiled at him without a care in the world. He straightened. He would not let any of this touch her. Tomorrow's meeting would mark the beginning of his counterattack. Public exposure was already unfolding. Now came the escalation. Rowan barely slept. Not because of fear, he'd lived through nights far worse, but because his mind kept replaying Maris's warning, the consultant's thinly veiled threat, and the unmistakable shadow of the sedan that had followed him. All signs pointed to the same truth. Tomorrow's meeting wasn't a formality. It was a battlefield disguised as a conference room. By morning, he had reviewed his original report twice, cross-checked his license information, and printed copies of every timestamp Maris had salvaged. He wouldn't walk in defenseless, not today. Lena ate breakfast at the table, humming softly as she squeezed honey onto toast. She looked so at peace, so unaware of the machinery shifting around her father, that for a moment Rowan allowed himself to breathe her calm in like air. "You okay, Dad?" she asked suddenly, eyes bright but curious. He smiled. "Yeah, just a busy day ahead." "Do you fix something big today?" He hesitated, only a second. "Maybe," she grinned proudly. "You always do." That anchored him more than she knew. He dropped her off at school, watched until she disappeared through the doors, then drove toward the courthouse annex. No black sedan followed this time, too obvious. Today, the pressure would come through controlled channels, not surveillance. He entered room 4, B 10 minutes early. The lights were bright. The long rectangular table stretched across the center. Empty for now, except for Judge Valewood's clerk preparing materials. She looked up. "Mr. Halberg, good morning." "Morning," he replied, taking a seat. "You'll be asked technical questions," she said quietly. "Answer simply. Don't let them pull you into hypotheticals." He nodded. "Understood." She paused, studying him. "They're bringing in an external consultant." "Vantrell's?" Rowan asked. She didn't answer. She didn't have to. The door opened sharply. Elias Vantrell strode in with 2 attorneys and a man Rowan immediately recognized, not by face, but by the polished confidence of someone who lived in boardrooms. Their hired external consultant. Vantrell's expression carried a restrained fury, the kind of tight-contained anger that wasn't allowed to spill, because reputation mattered more than emotion. Gave Rowan a curt nod, acknowledgement without respect. "Mr. Halberg," he said coolly, "I trust you're prepared to clarify the claims you made yesterday." Rowan didn't rise to the bait. "I'm prepared to discuss the data." The consultant sat across from him. "We've reviewed your objection. There are questions." "Then let's answer them," Rowan said calmly. Judge Valewood entered moments later, bringing the room to attention. She took her seat at the head of the table, reviewing the agenda. This meeting, she began, is to clarify discrepancies between the airflow model submitted by petitioner and the objection filed by Mr. Hallberg. She looked at Rowan. We'll proceed methodically. Please walk us through your findings. Rowan opened his binder, hands steady. He explained the humidity variable fault first. He showed the corrected curves. He showed the airflow reversal risk. He kept his tone measured, his language accessible, just as he'd done hundreds of times in his former work. Van Trell's consultant watched him with clinical intensity, noting every detail. When Rowan finished, the consultant leaned back. Your conclusions rely on the assumption that humidity levels will reach their projected maximums. That's statistically unlikely. Rowan met his gaze. Unlikely doesn't mean impossible, and building codes are written for worst-case conditions, not ideal ones. Judge Vailwood nodded in agreement. The consultant tried again. Even then, airflow issues wouldn't pose immediate risk. Rowan flipped to a new page, photographs of ventilated spaces he'd inspected in his career. Slow contamination is still contamination. Families don't always know what they're breathing. Something flickered in Van Trell's eyes. Not understanding, but irritation. Rowan's calm was starting to work against them. The consultant shifted tactics. Your license. Why did you leave federal service? There it was. The trap. The attempt to frame him as unstable or biased. Rowan didn't flinch. My wife passed away. My daughter needed me home. A subtle hush rolled through the room. Judge Vailwood's tone softened. His credentials are valid. Personal circumstances do not diminish expertise. Van Trell's attorney tried next. Mr. Hallberg, did you file your objection out of resentment? Perhaps because you're no longer working at your previous level? The implication stung, but not deeply. Rowan had lived long enough to know people used whatever words they could to tear down the truth. No, he said plainly. I filed it because the numbers were wrong. And because poor ventilation affects your daughter, the attorney pushed. Rowan paused. Yes, and many others. That honesty landed more heavily than denial ever could. Judge Vailwood turned to Van Trell's team. Do you dispute the airflow reversal risk as presented? The consultant hesitated. A fatal pause. We dispute the probability, he said finally. But not the possibility? Rowan asked. A longer pause. No. That single word shifted the entire room. Judge Vailwood leaned back. Then Mr. Hallberg's objection warrants full investigation. Van Trell's composure cracked. Your Honor, this will delay the project by months. Our investors' safety, she said sharply, outweighs investor timelines. The meeting moved into final notes, but Rowan sensed the battle wasn't over. When everyone stood, the subtle war for perception began again. Quiet glances, hushed whispers, the shifting of alliances. As Rowan reached the door, Judge Vailwood stopped him gently. Mr. Hallberg, he turned. Thank you, she said simply. He nodded, stepping out into the hallway. Before he could take another step, his phone buzzed. A message from an unknown sender. You shouldn't have pushed so far. Consider this your final warning. And below it, a photo of his truck parked in front of Lena's school. Rowan froze. The air around him changed. This wasn't corporate pressure anymore. This was personal. His calm didn't break, but something inside him did shift. Quietly, decisively. They had crossed the one line they should never have crossed. By the way, he murmured to himself with a steady breath, if you're following this, subscribe. Because this is where everything changes. Rowan stared at the photo on his phone. The image sharp, unmistakable, taken just hours ago. His truck parked outside Lena's school. No threats written, no names attached. But the message behind it roared louder than anything they could have typed. They wanted him afraid. They wanted him compliant. They wanted him to understand just how far they were willing to reach. But instead of fear, a cold clarity settled over him. Not rage, not panic. Something steadier, something old. The part of him that once led structural crisis teams through, collapsing corridors and chemical breach evacuations, the part he'd buried for Lena's sake. He slipped the phone into his pocket, inhaled once, and walked down the annex hallway without changing pace. Panic would draw attention. Calm would draw questions. Right now, he needed neither. His first priority was simple: get to Lena. Not because she was in danger, they wouldn't risk something that blatant, but because he needed to see her with his own eyes before the next move. He reached the parking lot fast, scanning the area. Ordinary cars, people leaving work. Nothing seemed out of place. But he knew better than to trust appearances. He got into his truck, locked the doors, and pulled out of the lot with controlled speed. Every mirror check became intentional. Every passing vehicle logged in his peripheral vision. He didn't take the direct road to her school. He took the long route, through streets with multiple exits, letting muscle memory from emergency operations guide him. No sedan followed, no tail at all. That was worse. Their threat wasn't about watching him now. It was about reminding him they could. When he arrived at the school, children were spilling out into the yard as teachers waved goodbye. He spotted Lena quickly, her backpack half unzipped, her ponytail crooked, laughing with another student. She was fine. Rowan waited until she saw him. Her entire face lit up. She ran to the truck and climbed in, chattering about her day before her seatbelt even clicked. "Did you fix the big thing?" she asked brightly once he started driving. His throat tightened. "Something like that." She leaned back in her seat, humming, unbothered, safe. He didn't go home immediately. He drove them to a public park instead, a wide open place with cameras, people, and sightlines he could see from every angle. He let Lena play on the swings while he sat on a bench nearby, his gaze constantly scanning. Soft footsteps approached. "Mr. Halberg," he turned sharply before recognizing the voice. Maris. She wore civilian clothes instead of her courthouse badge, and her nervousness clung to her like static. "What are you doing here?" he asked, keeping his tone calm for Lena's sake. "I followed you," she whispered, glancing around. "Not for surveillance, for safety." His shoulders eased half an inch. "Tell me." She sat beside him, lowering her voice. After the meeting ended, Vantrell's legal team headed straight to a restricted office. They were furious. "I overheard part of it. They said you'd force their hand." Rowan's gaze stayed on Lena. "Meaning what?" "They're escalating," Maris whispered. "Not legally, strategically. They want to discredit you at the federal level now." He didn't respond. He'd expected as much. Powerful people didn't lose quietly. But then Maris pulled something from her bag. A flash drive. "I shouldn't have taken this," she said, voice shaking. "But you need it more than they do." "What is it?" "Internal communications," she whispered. "Emails proving the airflow model was flagged months ago and showing exactly who ordered the burying of your report." Rowan's stomach dropped, not from fear, but from the magnitude of what she was handing him. This wasn't suspicion. This wasn't inference. This was evidence. Maris, he said quietly, this could ruin your career. She let out a breathless laugh. Better my career than my conscience. A shout interrupted them, Lena calling for him. Dad, look! She held up a leaf shaped like a star. He forced a smile and waved back. Beautiful, kiddo. When she returned to playing, Maris leaned closer. There's one more thing. Someone accessed your personnel file this morning. Rowan stilled. Why? To see if you have vulnerabilities, debt, health issues, custody risks. Her voice faltered. They're trying to find a lever, his steps, redundant backups, off-site storage. He slipped the drive into his pocket. His mind already moved to next steps. Redundant backups, off-site storage, creating a paper trail, escalating to oversight agencies before Van Trell's team could manufacture a counter-narrative. Maris stood. I'll contact you tonight. Use a private line. He nodded. Be careful going back. She gave a trembling smile. You too. Once she disappeared down the park path, Rowan rose and approached the swings. He lifted Lena gently, set her feet on the ground, and crouched so their eyes were level. Ready to go home? She nodded, gripping his hand. As they walked to the truck, Rowan felt the shift fully settle. This was no longer a safety review, no longer a courtroom dispute. This was a conflict between truth and power power had just made the mistake of involving his daughter. He opened the truck door for her and glanced at the sky, deepening toward dusk, streaked with amber and blue. Something inside him, something he thought had gone quiet forever, awakened again. The protector, the investigator, the expert who didn't back down from systems failing under stress. They wanted leverage. They'd just found the wrong man to threaten. The next move wouldn't be theirs. It would be his. Evening settled over the city by the time Rowan got Lena home. She curled up on the couch with her sketchbook while he moved quietly through the apartment, checking doors, windows, and the small details most people never thought twice about. He wasn't paranoid. He was prepared. When someone threatened a child, even indirectly, it changed the geometry of every decision. Once Lena was showered and tucked into bed, he sat at the small kitchen table with his laptop and the flash drive Maurice had given him. The kitchen light flickered softly above, casting a warm but fragile glow across the room. He plugged the drive in. Folders appeared instantly. Airflow _ correspondence _ internal review _ override _ logs external _ counsel _ directives. He clicked the first folder. Email chains spilled across the screen. Engineers raising concerns, supervisors acknowledging discrepancies, and then, weeks later, a blunt message from someone with authority. Mark Halberg's objection is to be downgraded. Reassign it. We don't need delays. No reasoning, no technical counter-argument, just raw suppression. He clicked the next folder. More logs. Timestamps manipulated. Notes rewritten. Entire sections marked non-critical, despite explicit concerns from junior analysts. This wasn't negligence. It was orchestration. He copied everything onto a secure encrypted drive, the kind federal responders used for sensitive data, and stored a second backup on a cloud server he knew couldn't be traced to him. Layers of redundancy, layers of protection, not just for himself, but for Lena, for Maris, for anyone caught in the blast radius of a truth this large. A soft voice came from the hallway. Dad? He closed the laptop immediately. Hey, kiddo, can't sleep. She rubbed her eyes. Had a bad dream. He lifted her into his arms and carried her back to bed. "You're safe," he whispered. "I'm right here." She curled against him, and he waited until her breathing softened into sleep before returning to the kitchen. Now came the harder question. Who could he trust with this? Oversight agencies were slow. Internal reviews could be influenced. Going public too early would give Vantrell time to spin the narrative. But there was someone else. Someone who'd contacted him earlier. He scrolled to the message from his old field colleague. "Call me. You'll want advice." He dialed. The voice answered immediately. "You holding up?" "Barely," Rowan admitted. "I have proof the model was manipulated. Proof my objection was suppressed." A low whistle. "They'll try to bury you for this." "I know." "Then don't go through internal channels. Go through legal supervision. Someone above their pay grade. I can't expose Lena to more risk." "You won't," the voice said. "But you need a witness. Someone who can verify your credentials and your findings. Someone the court trusts." Rowan paused. "Judge Valewood." A satisfied exhale crackled through the speaker. "Exactly. She's meticulous, uncompromising. If she sees what you have, she won't let it disappear." Rowan nodded. "Then tomorrow morning, I'll request a private review." "Good. And Halberg?" "Yeah? Be careful. People like Vantrell don't lose quietly." Rowan hung up and leaned back, feeling the weight of what he was about to ignite. His evidence could freeze the entire development, expose internal corruption, and put multiple careers, perhaps even reputations, on the line. But the alternative was letting deceit shape the skyline, letting families breathe in toxins, letting money drown out truth. He stood and walked to the window, staring out at the city. Towers rose across the dark horizon, windows glittering like constellations. How many of those buildings had he inspected in his past life? How many lives had he protected without ever meeting them? He thought of his wife, her quiet strength, her belief that truth mattered even when it was inconvenient. She would have told him not to back down. She would have told him to protect their daughter by protecting the world she'd grow up in. His phone buzzed again. A new message. From Maris. "They know I accessed the old log. I'm leaving town for a day or two. I'll contact you when I'm safe. Don't stop. Please." He closed his eyes briefly. She had risked everything. He wouldn't let her effort fall apart. He turned back to the table, reopening his laptop. He began drafting a formal request for judicial review, attaching preliminary snippets of the evidence, not enough to risk everything, but enough to force procedural attention. Once submitted, it couldn't be quietly deleted. It created a trail. His fingers moved steadily across the keys. Halfway through the draft, headlights flashed across his window, a vehicle, stopping. Rowan froze. Not out of fear, out of calculation. He stepped closer to the curtains and parted them an inch. A black sedan, not the same one. This one was newer, cleaner, government plates. A man stepped out, mid-50s, suit crisp, posture disciplined, not corporate, official. And he wasn't walking toward Rowan's building. He was waiting. Rowan watched him for a full minute. Then the man looked up, directly at Rowan's window. Not threatening, not aggressive, just acknowledging he knew Rowan was there. Rowan's pulse steadied. Whoever this was, he wasn't hiding. That meant he wasn't from Vantrell's team. His phone buzzed again, another message. From an unknown number, but with a federal tag he recognized instantly. "Mr. Halberg, we need to speak regarding the evidence you've uncovered. We're outside." Rowan exhaled, slowly, deeply. This wasn't retaliation. This was escalation, the kind he had initiated without realizing it. He shut down his laptop and grabbed his secure drive, pocketing it as he stepped toward the door. Before he left, he looked down the hallway toward Lena's room. "Stay asleep," he murmured. "I've got the rest." Then he opened the door and walked into the night, toward the man who might finally tip the scales. The man waiting beside the black sedan didn't move as Rowan approached. He stood with the steadiness of someone used to delivering news that changed lives. Streetlights cast thin halos across the pavement, glinting off the badge clipped discreetly inside his jacket. "Mr. Halberg," the man said. His voice was low, practiced, undeniably official. "I'm Special Agent Corvin Reyes. Thank you for coming out." Rowan stopped a careful distance away. "You didn't give me much choice. On the contrary, you could have ignored the message, but you didn't." Reyes gestured to the passenger door. "May we talk somewhere private? 5 minutes, nothing more." Rowan glanced back at his apartment building. Lena slept only a few floors above. He couldn't risk anyone approaching the door while he wasn't there. "We talk here," he said, "in the open." Reyes considered that, then nodded once. "Very well." A quiet moment settled between them, broken only by the hush of passing cars. "We received an alert," Reyes began, "from a judicial clerk who flagged your request for private review. It contained partial evidence implying internal tampering at Vantrell's Urban Flow division." "That's correct." "And you're aware," Reyes continued, "that such tampering, if verified, could qualify as federal fraud, regulatory obstruction, and endangerment of public regions." Rowan met his eyes. "That's why I filed it." Reyes exhaled, not impatient, measured. "You've walked into something larger than you realize, and you've made yourself a target." "I noticed," Rowan said dryly. Reyes allowed a faint, humorless smile. "I'm not here to intimidate you. I'm here to prevent you from becoming collateral damage." Rowan shifted his weight. "What do you want?" "Everything," Reyes answered. "Every file, every timestamp, every redirect, every suppressed report. We need a complete chain of evidence before Vantrell's board catches wind and begins their cleanup." Rowan didn't move. "If I hand this over, what guarantees do I have that it won't disappear into some vault where no one ever sees it again?" Reyes didn't flinch. "Your caution is wise. So here are my assurances. 1. Your evidence will be entered into sealed federal custody. 2. A parallel digital archive will be time-stamped through an independent oversight server. 3. A judge, not a board, not an agency, will be the first to review it." A pause. "And 4. You will have whistleblower protection, whether you request anonymity or testify publicly." Rowan absorbed every word, every promise, every risk. Slowly, he reached into his jacket and tapped the secured drive. "I have what you're asking for, but before anything is transferred, I need something from you." Reyes raised an eyebrow. "Yes?" "If Vantrell retaliates against my daughter, directly or indirectly, I want immediate federal intervention. No delay, no procedural excuses." Reyes's expression sharpened, not cruelly, not bureaucratically, but with a flicker of genuine human understanding. "You have my word," he said quietly. "Children don't get dragged into this. Not on my watch." Rowan nodded once, small, but decisive. "Good." He handed over the drive. Reyes accepted it like it was fragile enough to shatter and powerful enough to burn through concrete. "I'm initiating the chain of custody now." He opened a device case, scanned the drive, and secured it inside. A soft click sealed the compartment. "Mr. Halberg," he said, "you just accelerated this investigation by weeks, maybe months. Thank you." Rowan didn't feel relieved. Not yet. "What happens next?" Reyes closed the case. "We build the wall before Van Trell realizes there's a breach." He glanced at the building behind Rowan. "I suggest you stay alert tonight. They won't know the drive is gone yet, but when they do, they'll panic." "Exactly." Reyes stepped back, preparing to leave. But something in Rowan refused to let the conversation end without one more question. "Why are you really here, Reyes? Most federal agents don't step into a case until damage is fully undeniable." Reyes stopped, studying him. "Because I've seen corporations bury the truth before. Cities pay for it. Families pay for it. You're the first person in months who didn't look away when you realized what was happening. A beat. People like you are rare." With that, he slid into the sedan and drove off, tail lights fading into silence. Rowan remained in the parking lot a full minute before heading back upstairs. Inside the apartment, the world felt too quiet, like the stillness before a structural collapse. He checked every lock again, then he walked into Lena's room. She slept peacefully, her small hands curled against the blanket, completely unaware of the storm gathering around them. He stood there longer than he meant to. When he finally returned to the kitchen table, he opened his laptop, not to work, but to prepare. He duplicated the remnants of the investigation structure, updated his personal notes, and drafted a timeline of events in case anything happened to him. He didn't write out of fear. He wrote out of strategy. At 1:14 a.m., his phone buzzed again. A message. From Stanton. "We need to meet. Not safe for me to say more. Tomorrow morning. Same overlook where you saw the tower lights." Rowan stared at the screen. Stanton had finally crossed the line, from conflicted observer to active ally. Phase A of Rowan's strategy had been simple. Gather proof, create leverage, and destabilize the illusion of corporate integrity. Phase B had begun the moment he handed that drive to Reyes. Now Phase C, the exposure phase, was starting to unfold on its own. Rowan closed the laptop. Tomorrow would be the turning point. Dawn pressed a pale glow across the city as Rowan drove toward the overlook where he'd last seen the tower lights shimmer against the river. The roads were nearly empty, too early for commuters, too late for night workers, which made every passing car feel like a calculated variable, not traffic. Stanton waited near the railing, hands jammed into his jacket pockets, shoulders tense enough to betray a sleepless night. He turned sharply. When Rowan approached, relief flickering through his expression. "You came," Stanton said. "You asked," Rowan replied. "What's going on?" Stanton scanned the area before speaking. "They know the model is compromised. Someone inside the division realized you accessed the archived logs. They're trying to pin unauthorized retrieval on me." Rowan's jaw tightened. "Are you in danger?" "Not yet," Stanton said. "But they're trying to isolate me, strip my system access, move meetings without notice." His voice cracked, not with fear, but with exhaustion. "They want a scapegoat, and I am the weakest target." "No," Rowan said firmly. "They're panicking." Stanton swallowed. "There's more. Last night, Van Trell's board held an emergency session. They plan to announce a routine audit of the airflow model next week. It's a cover. They're preparing to rewrite everything before external regulators can see it." So, Reyes had been right. The corporation's instinct was to bury the truth. But Rowan was already miles ahead. He stepped closer. Listen carefully. I turned the evidence over to federal custody. It's sealed, time-stamped, and already out of Vantrell's reach. They can rewrite the model 10 times. None of it will matter now. Stanton stared at him. Then why am I here? Because what comes next, Rowan said, requires someone inside the building who still has a conscience. Stanton's breath trembled. Tell me what you need. Rowan pulled a folded paper from his jacket. Not sensitive data, not evidence, but a simple timeline. This is everything I submitted to judicial review. Tomorrow, a federal judge will be briefed. After that, subpoenas, depositions, a freeze order on the airflow project. Stanton blinked, stunned. It's really happening? Yes, Rowan held his gaze. And when regulators ask who inside Vantrell first noticed irregularities, your name will appear because you documented your concerns months before I ever did. Stanton's face tightened. They won't forgive that. They don't have to, Rowan said. You only need protection. And you think they'll protect me? I know they will, Rowan said. Reyes already has your name flagged in the chain. You're considered an early warning witness. You'll be under federal shield before Vantrell can invent a reason to fire you. The wind brushed across the overlook, carrying the distant hum of early morning construction. Stanton exhaled shakily. I should have spoken up sooner. You spoke when it mattered, Rowan said. Stanton closed his eyes briefly, a faint steadiness returning. What about you? They won't just walk away from this. You expose their entire division. I'm prepared, Rowan answered. Reyes made sure my testimony and evidence exist in 3 separate archives. Even if something happens to me, the truth moves forward. You're not worried. I'm focused, Rowan corrected. And I don't fight alone, not anymore. Stanton nodded slowly. So, what do I do today? Go to work, Rowan said. Act normal. Don't confront anyone. Don't mention this meeting. When the subpoenas arrive, you answer truthfully. When oversight asks who was pressured, you name every supervisor who tried to silence internal warnings. Stanton's voice steadied. And that will be enough? It will be the beginning, Rowan said. The rest is already in motion. The 2 men stood in silence for a moment, the horizon brightening behind them. Then Stanton spoke again, softer. Rowan, thank you. For what? For not letting them rewrite the world just because they had the power. Rowan lowered his gaze, thinking of Lena asleep in her room, unaware that her father had risked everything to keep her future clear of the smog someone else tried to hide. Some things are bigger than careers. A quiet understanding passed between them. They parted with no dramatic farewell, just a nod. 2 men who understood they were stepping into different kinds of battles, but aiming for the same truth. Later that afternoon, Rowan sat across from Special Agent Reyes in a quiet federal building conference room. A single folder lay between them. It's official, Reyes said. Federal review is underway. Judge Vailwood ordered a temporary freeze on Vantrell's airflow initiative. Internal communications have been subpoenaed. Rowan felt the ground shift, subtle but unmistakable. Not relief, not victory, momentum. There's something you should see, Reyes added. He opened the folder. Inside were printed email excerpts from Vantrell's board. One line stood out. Locate Halberg's original model. Damage control depends on neutralizing his objection. Neutralizing, Rowan said. Reyes nodded. They weren't planning to fire you. They were planning to discredit you. Rowan leaned back, jaw tightening. Not anymore. No, Reyes agreed. Not anymore. He closed the folder. Mr. Halberg, your testimony may reshape how environmental risk models are regulated nationwide. Rowan didn't speak for a moment. The weight of the words didn't crush him. It steadied him. Good, he finally said. Maybe then, what happened to my wife won't happen to anyone else. Reyes's expression softened. Your daughter will grow up knowing her father didn't bend. Rowan nodded once, quiet, resolute. A man who had carried truth through fire and was still standing. That night, Rowan returned home. Lena greeted him with a drawing, colored lines showing wind patterns around tall buildings. Made this for you, she said shyly. It's airflow, like your work. He knelt, eyes warming. It's perfect. And it was, because the world she imagined, the one she believed could be shaped honestly, was exactly the one he was fighting to build. Word count, 800 subscribe and don't miss our next story. The billionaire refused to shake his hand. Then a war hero saluted the single dad instead. Trust me, you'll feel it. And tell me in the comments, what injustice should we tackle next?